صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, we looked at the Mubtada and Khabar, right, as the building blocks of the Jumla Ismiya. And then we looked at what are the things that come into the Mubtada and Khabar, al-Awamil al-Dakhila ala al-Mubtada wal-Khabar, right, which are three. The first is kana wa akhawatuha, right? And with kana wa akhawatuha there is those huruf that are like Laysa. That's what we're looking at today, right? So overall there's three things that enter upon the Mubtada and the Khabar. Kana wa akhawatuha and al-huruf al-mushabbaha bi Laysa and af'al al-muqaraba. This completes. So there's kana and akhawatuha and the things that behave like kana wa akhawatuha, right? Which are al-huruf al-mushabbaha bi Laysa and af'al al-muqaraba. Then after that we'll get to in the things that operate like inna. So inna wa akhawatuha and la li nafyi al-jins. That's coming up. And the third thing is that which does nasb of both the mubtada and khabar, which is dhanna and its akhawat. So overall, there's three types of things that enter into the mubtada and khabar. And he broke this down in the babul awamil التي تدخل على المبتدا والخبر, right? So one is ما يرفع المبتدا وينصب الخبر. Under that, what do you have? كان وأخواتها الحروف المشبهة بليس and أفعال المقاربة. Today we're going to look at الحروف المشبهة بليس and أفعال المقاربة. Then we get to ما ينصب المبتدا ويرفع الخبر, which is إن وأخواتها and لا التي لنفي الجنس. Then you have that which elevates everything, puts the mubtada in nasb and the khabar in nasb, which is dhanna wa akhawatuha, right? Just to put us, where are we in the map of the Ajrumiyya? So we looked at kana wa akhawatuha, and kana, why is kana used? Right? Just ask the question, right? If we take one of the examples, right, that was in the text itself, right? وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا, right? If we say, the sentence just as a mubtada and khabar would be Allahu Ghafurun Rahim. The lafzul jalala is the mubtada marfu', right? Right? Allahu the verse we're referring to is, I think it's the first Quranic example there, Kan Allahu Ghafuran Rahima, right? So if we take Allahu Ghafurun Rahim, lafzul jalala Allah, mubtada marfu'. Ghafur is khabar awwal marfu' and Rahim is khabar thani, right? For the same mubtada, right? Okay, so Allahu Ghafur, right? What does kana do? What's the difference between Allahu Ghafurun Rahim and Kan Allahu Ghafuran Rahima? What's the difference? What sense of difference does it convey to you in meaning? Yeah. So the Jumla Ismiya, right, is affirmative, right? Allahu, and this comes up in the Quran, Wallahu Ghafurun Rahim, right? What would that tell you? Allah is this, right? It's affirmative. Kana and the others, why does it take something that's mansoob? Right? Because it brings a meaning of ismi, of the jumla fi'liya into it. Right? Firstly, kana is what? Kana is a fi'l. It enters into what was originally a jumla fi'liya of mubtada and khabar. So kana is a fi'l, and with all its naqs, etc., etc., right? But what does it do? It brings the time dimension into it. Kana Allahu Ghafur Rahima. Now, of course, with respect to Allah, kana can refer to either, either take something into the past, right? Kana waliduhu salihan. His father was, rahimahullah, right? Takes it into the past. Or, right, can also indicate the sense of continuity, right? Like the bab of kana in the shama'il of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Right? And the Sahaba used it to describe all kinds of things of the Prophet ﷺ. If you look in al-Jami' al-Saghir of Imam al-Suyuti, there's loads of hadiths. Actually, some took that out from al-Jami' al-Saghir and compiled it separately. But it's there in Jami' al-Saghir. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يحب التيامن في كل شيء. Does that have the Prophet ﷺ liked using the right in everything? Does that mean that he liked it sometime in the past? No. Kana there has a meaning of time, but in the sense of continuity. And that's how it applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It's not Allah was Ghafurur Rahim, but Kana Allahu Ghafurur Rahim, and Allah is indeed ever. Right? It has a sense of continuity. Right? So, but that's the role that kana and akhawatuha play. And there's a number of other roles, but basically to appreciate why is it in this way. And if you look at the context of the verses, right, the difference between the where Allah mentions just affirmatively about Himself, right? For example, إنه هو الغفور الرحيم, right? In the verses, يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله, don't despair of the mercy of Allah, إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا, إنه هو الغفور الرحيم, right? It is affirmative. Indeed, it is He who is, right? That's the role of the jumla ismiya. But when kana enters into something, it indicates that as one affirms the establishment of that meaning, right? The other affirms the continuity of that meaning, right? وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا, for example, right? Etc. Okay. And there's other shades of meaning that are conveyed, but just to remind ourselves, because ultimately we study grammar as a bridge to meaning. So then he says, Faslun. So he doesn't give it a title. This is al-huruf al-mushabbaha bi Laysa, right? So he says, وَأَمَّا الْحُرُوفُ الْمُشَبَّهَةُ بِلَيْسَ. As for the huruf that resemble Laysa, right? فَأَرْبَعَةٌ ما ولا وإن ولاتي or ولات, and these are all nafiya, right? So these are huruf that resemble Laysa. How do they resemble Laysa? في النفي, right? They're all negative, like Laysa. والجمود, they're jamida, not mushtaqqa. and that they enter upon the jumla ismiya. So they share three characteristics. Okay? Now, some of these, right, like, have multiple usages, right? So ma has, there are different kinds of ma. Here is the ma that is nafiya, right? The la, you have la that is nahiya, right? The number of different types of la. Here is the la that's nafiya. In, again, in has the meaning of being shartiya, of conditional, etc. But there's an in that is used for the purpose of nafi, right? And lata, and we'll come to that. Of these, right, as al-Faki tells us, أكثرها عملا ما, right? Right? And why does it act in this way? Because the Arabs used it in this way. And al-Faki points out the qiyas was that it shouldn't work in this way. Because it has more than, because it's not unique to this usage. Whereas what you see, the Laysa and the things that do amal of Laysa, they work, they tend to be exclusive in their primary usage. So anyways, right? So each has conditions, right? Each has conditions, right? As the commentator, ولما كان العمل كل منهما على خلاف الأصل اشترط له شروط, right? So أما ما, right? And this is ما that is نافية, right? فتعمل عمل ليس عند الحجازيين فقط, عند الحجازيين فقط, right? بشرط, right? So they put 4 conditions for in to act in this way. Let's read the الأول ألا تقترن بإن. فأما ما فتعمل عمل ليس عند الحجازيين فقط. Not according to the other Arab tribes. Because the Hijaz is significant, because what's within the Hijaz? Yeah. Would it encompass the lugha of Quraysh? It's significant, right? Right?
Shaykh, is it in or
In. Anyone have an? No, in. Sorry. What?
In wa an.
Right? وَلَا تَقْتَرِنَ. Okay, so what were we talking? I was talking about the huruf al-mushabbaha bilaysa are 4. So sorry. ما ولا وإن ولات. Right? That's the in. أما ما فتعمل عمل ليس عند الحجازين فقط. أولا أن لا تقترن بأن الزائدة. بأن الزائدة. Right? This is the, so if you're asking over here, أن لا تقترن بأن, and this is الزائدة. والثاني أن لا تقترن بإلا. ثالثا أن لا يتقدم خبرها على اسمها. Right? ورابعا ولا يتقدم معمول خبرها على اسمها. Right? So the 4 conditions for ما to play this role. Right? That it's not connected with in. Right? With in or an. What do you have? Okay.
So Shaykh, I have in this copy in.
Yeah.
Here I have so which one is the
In. Yeah, I have the same error. What are you looking at? Okay. In. Yeah. Right? Can you just grab me my bag because my kawakib is in there. That's why having grammar books that are erroneous is problematic, right? 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 And لا يكون خبرها بإلا أن لا يقترن خبرها بإلا. Right? Right? So its khabar is not connected with illa. And لا يتقدم خبرها على اسمها. That is, khabar is not مقدم على الاسم, which can be done in a mubtada and khabar. That's it. Nor the ma'mul of its khabar precede its ism. Right? That's a fourth, رابعا, right? ولا معمول خبرها على اسمها. Right? إلا إذا كان المعمول ظرفا أو جارا أو مجمورا أو مجرورا أو جارا ومجرورا. The fourth is that the معمول of its khabar, right, where the khabar is itself a composite. The معمول of the khabar cannot come before the ism unless the معمول is a ظرف or a jar ومجرور. So he gives us an example then. فالمستوفية للشروط نحو ما زيد ذاهبا. Right? ما زيد ذاهبا. Right? ما هذا بشرا. ما هذا بشرا. Right? Right? إلا إذا كان. So فالمستوفية للشروط ما زيد ذاهبا. Right? And it's come in the Quran. ما هذا بشرا. Right? ما هن أمهاتهم وما هن أمهاتهم. Right? ما هن أمهاتهم from Surah Al-Mujadala. Right? Now this is not common. This is not common. The usage of ma like this exists. It's there in the Quran, but it's not common, which is why Faqih tells us it only happens twice in the Quran. Right? These are the only two examples. Al-Faqih says, وَلَمْ يَقَعْ فِي الْقُرْآنِ إعمال ما صريحا في غير هاتين الآيتين. Right? Right? So it exists, it's not common. It's not common. Right? Now, practically, this is not something you would use in regular Arabic, in the sense that you wouldn't hear an Arab say, and frankly, most Arabs, and you just watch the news sometimes, right? Most Arabs struggle to put two sentences together, right? Or three, two maybe, right? Especially politicians, people appear on the news, it's awkward, right? So don't say things like this. You want to never experiment on rare usages, right? Unless you have an ear for it. You would just say, ما زيد ذاهب, you say, ليس زيد ذاهبا, right? You just stick to the asl, right? So this is rare. It exists, but it's rare, right? ما هذا بشرا وما هن أمهاتهم, right? Right? So now ما هذا بشرا, the i'rab is what? This is called ما نافية حجازية. Right? Because it's rare. Right? And the هذا ها حرف تنبيه, ذا اسم إشارة في محل رفع, and it's the اسم of ما. بشرا خبر ما الحجازية منصوب بفتح آخره. Right? Right? Okay. So then he says, he goes through the examples of when any of these conditions are not fulfilled. Right? So he mentions the first. فإن اقترنت بإن بطل عملها. Right? نحو ما إن زيد قائم. Right? 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 ما إن زيد قائم. Right? Right? Again, it can be said this way, but it's not a normal usage. Right? So why doesn't it do this amal here? What condition is missing? The presence, and this is the presence of in. Right? There's four conditions. The first is and لا تقترن بإن. So here ما إن زيد قائم, there's an in there, so it doesn't act. The second is وكذلك وكذا إن اقترن خبرها بإلا. Right? Right? نحو, and this comes up in the Quran in this way. Right? ما محمد إلا رسول. ما محمد إلا رسول. This breaks which condition? أن لا يقترن خبرها بإلا. Because if you take the original statement is محمد رسول. Right? محمد رسول. One way of Muhammad is a messenger. But you say ما محمد, ما بمعنى ليس. Right? Here, right? ما محمد إلا رسول. Right? It's for greater emphasis. Right? ما Muhammad is not anything but a prophet, but a messenger. Of course, there's countless meanings in that, right? Because if you say Muhammadun Rasul, right, this identifies what he is, but yahtamil, okay, he's a messenger, but he also does many other things. Right? Right? And it's come that way in the Quran. Muhammadun Rasulullah. Right? But when it comes, Ma Muhammadun illa Rasul, it tells us many things about the role of the Prophet ﷺ, that everything about him, it has a janib of reflecting his risala. Then say, how does that fit with the things that are from the khasa'is of the Prophet ﷺ? The khasa'is, the thing they're unique to the Prophet ﷺ, they highlight that he is the unique messenger of God, right? That he has things that are unique to him. So it has emphasis. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. Right? So this is the second condition not being fulfilled, right? Then he gives an example. وَكَذَا إِن تَقَدَّمَ خَبَرُهَا عَلَى اسْمِهَا. Right? وكذا إن تقدم وكذا or كذلك إن تقدم خبرها على على اسمها نحو ما قائم زيد. ما قائم زيد. Right? 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 That's the third condition, right? What's the fourth condition? أو تقدم معمول الخبر, right? And this is the fourth condition being negated. نحو يعني ظرف نحو ما طعامك زيد. ما طعامك زيد أكل. ما طعامك زيد أكل. Right? This is the معمول. Right? ما طعامك زيد أكل. Right? Right? Of course, again, don't run these kinds of speaking experiments yourself. ما طعامك زيد أكل. آكل. What? Yeah, I have ضبط of it. ما طعامك زيد آكل. Right? ما طعامك زيد آكل. Right? Right? So زيد آكل طعامك. The original statement is زيد آكل طعامك. Right? آكل is an اسم فاعل. Okay? زيد آكل مبتدأ خبر. But آكل resembles the فعل, so it takes a معمول. Right? Just like it takes a مفعول. زيد آكل طعامك. Right? But if you put this معمول, I say مبتدأ and خبر. زيد آكل, and آكل has a معمول which is منصوب طعامك. Right? If you put the ما, you put ما طعامك زيد آكل, what happens? What doesn't behave? Yeah, right? Because if you say, if you didn't make this taqdeem, you put, let's forget ma for a second, Laysa, because ma behaves like Laysa. You put Zaydun akilun ta'amaka. This is the mubtada and khabar. What would it be? Zaydun akilun mubtada khabar. Akil takes a ma'mul, which is ta'amaka. Right? Now, same sentence, we put Laysa before it. Laysa Zaydun akilan ta'amaka. Right? Laysa. Or Ma Zaydun akilan ta'amaka. The Ma al-Hijaziyya. Right? Behaves like Laysa. Right? But if we take this ma'mul and we put it after the Ma, right? ما طعامك زيد, it would not be آكلا. It would be آكلون. Because that vitiates the fourth condition. Why does it work this way? Right? They say because this is, this is a weak amil. The ma is a weak amil, basically. Right? Okay. فإن كان ظرفا, right? Right? فإن, sorry, I lost my place. فإن كان ظرفا نحو ما عندك زيد جالسا أو جارا ومجرورا نحو ما في الدار زيد جالسا لم يبطل عملها. Right? So if the ma'mul comes first, right? But the ma'mul of the khabar is a dharf or a jar or majroor. Dharf like ما عندك زيد جالسا. Okay. Original statement is زيد جالس عندك. Okay. زيد مبتدأ, جالس خبر, and there's a dharf عندك. Now we could put Laysa before that. Laysa Zaydun jalisan عندك. And like Laysa is the ma. Ma Zaydun jalisan عندك. But we could say ما عندك زيد جالسا to highlight what? Because if you say ليس زيد جالسا, you're negating his julus. But you say ما عندك زيد, oh, this sounds really weird in Arabic. Someone said ما عندك زيد جالسا. It sounds strange. So don't apply these things. That's why sama is very important, right? Because not everything that's valid to say in Arabic, right? Like Arabs wonder, where do you come from, right? So ما عندك زيد جالسا, that you're negating his julus before you. But he could be jealous somewhere else, right? Right? لم يبطل عملها. Right? Now in some issues, right? And the reason behind this is that the dharf affects a statement less than an outright ma'mul, right? Right? But practically it goes back to sama'. That's how one tribe spoke this way, one time. But there's underlying reasons that they treated the dharf much more expansively than they treated an outright ma'mul, like the maf'ul, for example. Okay. Now, generally, we have seen the author of al-Ajrumiyya himself does not get into tribal differences, right? When you get to the Sharh Qatr, you'll see on pretty much things that we consider day-to-day Arabic, there's tribal differences. But in some places, it's almost inevitable to talk about the other tribes, because this man works, but not with all the tribes. So you're kind of forced to mention the other tribe, right? But the Hijazis have an advantage, because it includes Quraysh, right? So what does he say? وَبَنُو تَمِيمٍ لَا يَعْمَلُونَهَا وَإِنِ استوفت الشروط المذكورة. Okay? So according to Banu Tamim, they don't consider this la to be effective, right? i.e. لا يعملونها أي لا يعملونها عمل ليس. Right? Right? And you can see in the poetry an example of right of and the example of course is there's various examples given, right? Right? So al-Faki gives one example, right? Right? Okay, the part that applies is فأجاب ما قتل المحب حرام. Right? Right? That goes so Banu Tamim didn't make it act in the same way, right? You don't have to worry about Banu Tamim. When taking notes like something like this, it's good to distinguish between what's the main thing, the main usages. These four can act, right? Can act when these conditions, and there's a position that they don't, right? You want to be thorough, work through the examples, right? Faki, he gives one example, right? And وإن استوفت الشروط المتقدمة, right? Maulana al-Ahdal gives another example, and you can work through the example just to understand why they spoke the way they did. Okay, so that's ma. And then he tells us وَأَمَّا لَا, right? Right? So la has multiple usages. And if you want to look, if you look in Qawaid al-I'rab of Ibn Hisham, he'll give you a listing of the various usages of la. Right? Like any of these other things. Without too much complication. أما لا فتعمل عمل ليس أيضا عند الحجازيين فقط. لا also only acts according to the Hijaziyin, and that's right. But بالشروط المتقدمة في ما, with the same conditions as ما, right? 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 Well, with three of the four previous conditions, so the first one does not apply, right? Right? Which is إن لا تقترن بإن الزائدة, right? So you may want to note that every time this in الزائدة is mentioned in my copy, it says an. It is amazing, right? Very annoying because you wish to assume that if you're a grammatical text, you'd know your grammar. وتزيد بشرط آخر وهو أن يكون اسمها وخبرها نكرتين, right? So the لا النافية, right? Right? And this is often called لا النافية للجنس or لا النافية للوحدة ظاهرا, right? So it has so here there's a bit of tawassu. Both the commentators point out that this لا النافية تعمل عمل ليس بالشروط المتقدمة. How many shurut were mentioned for ma? 4, right? Which you can see before. They point out that it's the second, third, and fourth condition, not the first, right? For the simple reason, but the reason that matan is not wrong is because the la an-nafiya, that in does not enter into it. So the matan is sound. But just to know the first condition doesn't happen. And it's an in, correct? Okay, sorry, because my copy, sorry, it's getting me dazed a little bit. Sorry. Okay? Because every single time, right? So begin, right? وَتَزِيدُ آخر وهو, and there's one extra condition, which is that the ism and khabar are both indefinite. نحو لا رجل أفضل منك. There's no man better than you. Right? Right? So so you can't say, because the la nafiya, it negates a category, right? Or that which is akin to a category, right? La rajula, right? Yani, right? So if you say, you don't say so la raj. What's the i'rab of the example given? لا رجل أفضل منك. لا رجل أفضل منك. لا رجل تعمل عمل ليس. ليس رجل أفضل منك. لا رجل أفضل منك. لا رجل أفضل منك. But you would not say لا زيد قائما. Unless you meant to negate that the category. But that'd be quite far-fetched. Right? So لا رجل أفضل منك. This لا نافية تعمل عمل ليس. رجل is the ism of لا النافية الحجازية يعني مرفوع بالضمة. أفضل is the خبر of لا النافية الحجازية. It's it's أفضل it's خبر المنصوب بالفتحة. منك is جار المجرور من and the kaf, right? And he says وأكثر عملها في الشعر. Right? وأكثر عملها في الشعر. Right? So the shu'ara used it quite a bit. But it's not unique to it. And here there's a note pointed out by right? Right? So Al-Fakihi points out that it's not unique to shi'r, but this usage is so rare of the لا النافية التي تعمل عمل ليس, right? That in قطر الندى and اللمحة البدري, there's two works. There's a work called al-Lumha al-Badriya. There's separate work called al-Mulha. Right? Mulhatul I'rab of al-Hariri. This would appear to be al-Lumha al-Badriya. Anyways, so in Qatr al-Nada, Ibn Hisham said it's only used in Shi'r. But Faki said no, it's also used in other than in Shi'r. Right? Okay. Right? But again, this is a rare usage. This is a rare usage. So you can sort of sleep through this a little bit, insofar as you need to be aware that it exists. Right? And right? And actually, so Al-Fakihi argued that this is only in Shi'r, so that it's not only in Shi'r, but what is mentioned in Qatr al-Nada is defended extensively by Mawlana al-Ahdal, who came after Al-Fakihi, right? So he quotes Ibn Anqa in Hawashi al-Bahja, عملها قليل جدا وخصه أكثر المغاربة بالشعر انتهى. قال العصامي في شرح الشذور صرح غير واحد بأنها لا تعمل إلا في الشعر بل ظاهر عبارة الرضي, and he's a big deal, رضي الدين الاستراباذي, that's why, because last name is so long, just call him الرضي, شرح الرضي على الكافية, right? أنه رأى جميع النحاة, أنه رأي جميع النحاة, that all the grammarians said it لا تعمل إلا في الشعر. وجزم ذلك المصنف في القطر وغيره, right? So anyways, so this is only, so what's the reason for this? Don't use it, basically, right? Don't run lexical experiments. So like, though you could theoretically say that la, because there's people get confused here. There's a la that is coming. What's the la that's coming in the Ajrumiyya? Right? There's la لنفي الجنس that's coming. What bab does it come under? The Ajrumiyya? Yeah, but what's the section called? Babu la. You can see it in the Ajrumiyya, Babu la. What does that la do? Which la is that? Right? That's la nafiya lil jins, right? So this la resembles what? Laysa, right? So it is negative, but it acts like, that's why they call this la al-Hijaziyya, right? Right? You need to know it exists. This ma, they used it. It's rare, though there are the two instances of it in the Quran. Similarly, ma does act practically only in Shi'r, so never say it. You'll never find it in prose, but you will find it in Shi'r, right? Also rarely, but it's there, and they give examples. Just to if you like examples, that's one of the useful things to find. That's if you have Sharh Qatr al-Nada, for example, and Sharh Shuzur al-Dhahab, you can find examples from poetry of these kinds of things. And any decent edition of either one, like with the Ta'liqat of Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, will give you examples just to see they use it. But you'll be frustrated because the usage and vocabulary is rare. So these things, you put a footnote that these exist. It's important to put a footnote there that this la, though it is nafiya, right, this is different from la allati li nafi al-jins. That comes under babu la. Because what does that la do? What does it say in the Ajrumiyya? So loudly. تنصب. So what does it do? Yeah. لا رجل في الدار, right, for example. Right? But this la does, what does it do? It does the opposite, right? So this la al-Hijaziyya, what would it do to the la? Right? لا رجل أفضل منك. Right? لا رجل, the regular la that everybody agrees acts, what does it do? لا رجل أفضل منك. Right? Right? لا رجل في الدار. Here, لا رجل أفضل منك. It behaves like Laysa. So it's good to put, this is distinct from the la al-nafiya, the default la al-nafiya, which is coming up much later in the text, right? Right? Okay. وَأَمَّا إِن, and this is even rarer, because at least the Hijaziyin use this, but they used it very sparingly. Right? Even though the Hijaziyin are a significant component of the Arabs, right? But they used la in this way sparingly. Then we have وَأَمَّا إِن النَّافِيَةِ فَتَعْمَلُ عَمَلَ لَيْسَ فِي لُغَةِ الْعَالِيَةِ بالشروط المذكورة فيما سواء كان اسمها معرفة أو نكرة. Right? So, right? And al-aliya, so in behaves in that's nafiya, right? It behaves like laysa, and this is even more rare, right? This is even more rare. Right? Sahib al-Kawakib says, عملها أقل من عمل لا. Right? Right? And Ibn Malik and Abu Hayyan had some very interesting back and forth, right? On issues, right? They're two of the great, Abu Hayyan, of course, author of the great tafsir, right? But that's, you'll get to that when you get to it, right? But sometimes they get passionate, but you have to sort of put khilaf in context. Both say it acts rarely, the la is rare, and the in is even rarer, right? According to one. Now, so the people, al-Aliya are those tribes that are north of the of Najd, right? 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 So بشروط المتقدمة في ما سواء كان اسمها معرفة أو نكرة تقول إن زيد قائما. Right? إن زيد قائما. In here is like Laysa. So it's نافية. إن زيد قائما, meaning ليس زيد قائما. Don't even dream of saying this, right? Right? Because if you say in Zaydun qa'iman, an educated Arab would suppose that in here, if you said in Zaydun qa'iman, what would you assume? What is implicit? Kana. Right? Said in Zaydun qa'iman fadribhu. Right? Right? So the in would be assumed to be conditional. كان زيد قائما. But then if you have a conditional state, in that's conditional, sometimes right? And so, because after a shart, it's frequent to omit kana and even the ism of kana. Right? It says in قائما فاضربه. Right? Right? Especially in classical Arabics. Right? In Zaydun qa'iman fadribhu. Right? So you'd expect something like that. But if you say, but the lugha of Aliyah, they use in for nafi. Right? وَسُمِعَ مِنْ كَلَامِهِمْ. Right? Right? إن أحد خيرا من أحد إلا بالعافية. Right? 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 In أحد, and of course in here is بمعنى ما or بمعنى ليس. Right? In أحد. Right? Right? خيرا من أحد إلا بالعافية. Right? No one is better than another except in well-being. Now, سمع, right? It has been, right? It's a beautiful saying. Al-Afiyah, Maulana Al-Ahdal gives a beautiful explanation of what Afiyah is, right? And sometimes it's good to collect these fawaid where one finds them, right? And he quotes it from Al-Qamus Al-Muhit, right? Okay. And then أما right? أما لات فتعمل عمل ليس بشرط أن يكون اسمها وخبرها لفظ الحين. وأن يحذف اسمها أو خبرها والغالب حذف الاسم. Right? And the example in the Quran is فنادوا لات حين مناص أي ليس الحين حين فرار. Right? So لات لا Lata, its origin is la. Right? And there's a ta that was added to it. Right? Either, and the grammarians differed, either to make it feminine or lil mubalagha. Right? It's like really la. Right? But this is also, of course, a rare usage, but it's there and it's significant. There's the Quranic example. Right? But this is not so common, but the Arabs across the board use this, right? But rarely, right? It's not a common usage, right? Right? So in one sense, although this is very rare, have you heard anyone saying it? Use la tahina in day-to-day Arabic? No. But of the four, this is, because the others, two of them were used only by the Hijaziyin, and the third was used only by al-Aliya, right? Right? This fourth is very rare, even though accepted across as a usage across the Arabs, right? And there's the instance of it in the Quran, فَنَادَوْا وَلَاتَ حِينَ مَنَاصٍ. Right? So نادوا فعل فعل and فاعل نادى, right? فعل مضارع, etc. You can see. ولات الواو للحال, لات نافية تعمل عمل ليس ترفع الاسم وتنصب الخبر. حين خبرها. Right? So the تقدير is ولات حين مناص. ليس الحين حين مناص. الحين بمعنى الوقت. ولات, so لات, its condition is that both the ism and the khabar be حين. And this is not the time, that is the time of turning away. Manas means firar. وَلَاتَ حِينَ مَنَاصٍ أي لَيْسَ الْحِينُ حِينَ فِرَار. This time is not the time to flee. فَنَادَوْا, they called out. This is absolutely not the time that is the time to flee, so to speak. Right? So yeah, this is rare. وقرئ, this is shadh actually, as pointed out. وقرئ, right? What is the other qira'ah? Right? 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 وقرئ, and this is from the qira'at al-shadha. This is not from the qira'at al-mutawatira. وَلَاتَ حين مناص. Okay? Right? With a dhamma. Right? وَلَاتَ حين. My editor, I don't know. They go through cycles. Here, if you had to give one letter that you put a tashkil on, it would be the dhamma. They put two fathas on the mim and the noon of manas. But the one, and the lat, and we've already dealt with lat and heen already. Right? This of course comes to something I keep repeating because we should strive to be principled, right? That if you don't follow usul, you're a fool, basically, right? Right? That on what basis are you making tashkil? Says, wherever it fits. La. Right? An intelligent people, once, of course, you have to be careful what you commit to. Once, one of the things I managed to evade in my life was to be told to follow any grammar rules by Sheikh Nuh Keller in English. He did several workshops on writing, etc. I never attended them. We talk about it sometimes on his walk. Once he took out from his jacket, say these are my, I think it was 12 or 14 rules that he uses for the comma. So what I did, because he was standing up the hill, I was standing down the hill, I took 2 steps back. I said, MashaAllah, Sidi, that's amazing. Is it based on the, but I just kept enough distance discreetly that he couldn't give it to me. Because I was close enough that had he given it to me right then, I would have been able to take it. So I just discreetly took 1, maybe 2 steps back. I said, Subhanallah, Sayyidi, that's amazing. He said, take it from, and then he smiled. He says, no, I compiled it. MashaAllah, barakallahu ta'ala fikum. I didn't make any request to see it. He actually took it out from his jacket pocket, just put it back in. I was like, because unless you're being told explicitly, don't take on more than you can manage. If you're told, then you kind of have to listen. But that's being aqil. Right? That things follow principles. Right? This is a qira'ah shadha. So here these af'al, that تعمل عمل Laysa, they're all rare. 2 of them used by the Hijaziyin, which are la and in. Right? Ma and in. Sorry, let's go back. What are the first 2? Ma and la. Right? Ma and la. And these both act according to the Hijaziyin, they have the meaning of Laysa. Right? And then in behaves in this way according to Ahl al-Aliyah. Right? One subsection of the Arab. Doesn't hurt to find a map of the Qaba'il al-Arab. Right? You could share that, but from a reliable source. Don't just Google it and find some Google image, because all kinds of weird things you'll find. Right? So these are rare. There are conditions. Diagram it. Right? Diagram it. Be aware of it. Don't lose too much sleep over it. This last one is particularly useful also because there's a Quranic example, right? So one should be able to identify that. Okay. So we had only a few Quranic examples here, because what had the obvious Quranic examples here? Of where it does amal? Right? The ma hadha basharan, ma hunna ummahatihim. Right? Basharan and ma hadha basharan, laysa hadha basharan. Right? So these are 2 examples of amal. The other example that's Quranic is of adam al-amal, which is ma Muhammadun illa Rasul. Why does it not do amal here? Because of illa. Good. Right? One of the reasons the other things don't have examples, because there isn't, broadly speaking, it's not from Quranic usage, right? But lata, though as a word it's rare, what does la mean here? Lata means la, bima'na laysa, right? Right? And it's used for mubalagha, like in the Quranic example. It's clear for that, right? And that's it. So, and then we have أفعال المقاربة, right? Right? أفعال المقاربة. These are, of course, from the Zawaid to the Ajrumiyya, correct? Right? وأما أفعال المقاربة فهي ثلاثة أقسام. Right? So أفعال المقاربة, right? They indicate يعني المقاربة of closeness. So they indicate that the mubtada, right, is, sorry, the khabar is close to happening. Right? The khabar is close to happening to the mubtada, right? Okay. And muqaraba here has the meaning of qurb, right? Of muqaraba, because muqaraba has yani, the mufa'ala pattern, but indicates meaning, but here it means al-qurb. Right? And this term is for taghlib, right? Taghlib, because they're not all really for muqaraba, right? They're not all really for muqaraba. You can see Maulana, the author of the Kawakib explains, because the various af'al here, not some of them are for raja, etc. He breaks down. He breaks it down if you'd like to read about that. Because some are for raja. And ba'duha lishuru'. They're not for muqaraba. So some of them, muqaraba is the khabar is close. But some of them are for raja, for hope. Others indicate having begun. Right? Right? And so there's a nice definition shared by the author of the Kawakib from Ibn al-Hajib in his Kafiyah. Right? You can find it that أفعال المقاربة ما وضع لدنو الخبر. Right? أفعال المقاربة are that which was used to indicate the closeness of the khabar. رجاء أو حصولا أو أخذا فيه. The closeness of the khabar, either because it is hoped for, right? كل مرجو قريب, right? Everything hoped for is near, because it's in your sights. أو حصولا, or it's close to actually happening. So, right? So that's a good definition. ما وضع لدنو الخبر رجاء أو حصولا, or in happening, أو أخذا فيه. It's actually happening. Right? And that's a nice definition. Right? And these three parts are mentioned in the by أما أفعال المقاربة فهي ثلاثة أقسام. But he didn't actually define them. Right? So the definition there is quite useful. Yeah, al-Kawakib. Right? Right when it says أما أفعال المقاربة, right? It's أفعال المقاربة ما وضع لدنو الخبر. That was, which was placed for the closeness of the khabar. رجاء, in hope, أو حصولا, or in happening, أو أخذا فيه, or having actually begun it. And that's the three parts that are mentioned. Right? So he says, هي على ثلاثة أقسام. So this definition covers the three types. Right? So he says, ما وضع للدلالة على The first type ما وضع لدلالة على قرب الخبر وهو كاد وكرب بفتح الراء وكسرها كرب and كرب وأوشك. These three indicate قرب الخبر. Right? And we'll see examples of that, right? And they behave, how do they behave? He'll tell us, right? But what do they fall under? It's not a horror show. Let's not find out who ترفع المبتدأ وتنصب الخبر. Right? So كاد and كرب and أوشك. ثانيا ومن وضع للدلالة على رجاء الخبر. That would indicate that the khabar is hoped for. عسى وحرى وحلولق. It is really cool, but you'll struggle to use it day to day. I had a hope one day I'm going to use إحلولق. But you know, you'd have to feel really weird if you said something like that, right? وثالثا ما وضع للدلالة على الشروع وهو كثير. There's many verbs that behave like this, that they indicate that the mubda and the khabar have begun. Right? طفق, علق, أنشأ, أخذ, جعل. Right? And نحو, because there's many more than these. إخلولق with a خاء. إخلولق. Right? وهذه الأفعال تعمل عمل كان. They behave like كان. فترفع المبتدأ وتنصب الخبر. Right? But they have أحكام. They have أحكام. So he says إلا أن خبرها أولا يجب أن يكون فعلا مضارعا مؤخرا عنها رافعا لضمير اسمها غالبا. Right? That's the first. So it has to be a فعل مضارع. That is, the khabar has to be a فعل مضارع مؤخر عنها. Why? Because the whole point is it indicates what? Something happening. And something happening, and when is it happening? In the future. Right? So what role do the أفعال المقاربة play? Right? 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 So if you just say, for example, take a very simple one, right? If we take a simple example. Like أخذ. أخذ. Right? Right? The khabar needs to be a فعل مضارع. Right? Because it indicates, the فعل مضارع indicates the present or the future, right? Right? So you say, for example, عسى زيد أن يجلس. عسى زيد أن يجلس. Because it's hope that it'll happen, right? It's رجاء, right? أنشأ or جعل حمزة يكتب شعرا, right? So the جعل حمزة يكتب شعرا, right? Why? Because it indicates engaging in the meaning. But the engaging in the meaning, right, whether hoped in the future or drawing closer or shuru', each of these has to do with action. So it needs a fi'l mudari'. And in order for the فعل المقاربة to affect the jumla ismiya with this meaning, this order needs to be there. The فعل المقاربة comes first, and the فعل and the khabar, right, would be a فعل مضارع coming after it. Otherwise, the meaning of muqaraba would not arise, right? ويجب اقترانه بأن إن كان الفعل حرى وخلولق نحو حرى زيد أن يقوم وخلولقت السماء أن تمطر. ويجب تجرده من أن بعد أفعال الشروع نحو طفقا يخصفان عليهما من ورق الجنة. والأكثر في خبر عسى وأوشك الاقتران بأن نحو قوله سبحانه وتعالى فعسى الله أن يأتي بالفتح. وقوله النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يوشك أن يقع فيه، right? والأكثر في خبر كاد وكرب تجرده من أن نحو فذبحوه وما كادوا يفعلون. وقول الشاعر كرب القلب من جو I don't know who did the dabt of this. Okay. كرب القلب, right? Correct? Every tashkil on my copy is erroneous. It says كرب القلب. There's no way it could be كرب القلب. كرب القلب من جواه يذوب حين قال الوشاة هند غضوب. Right? كرب القلب من جواه يذوب. Right? This is really beautiful. Right. كرب القلب من جواه يذوب حين قال الوشاة هند غضوب. Right? And there's a really cool background to this, right? كرب بمعنى the heart was about كاد القلب من جواه, right? الجوى is شدة الوجد, from the intensity of its ecstasy or pain, right? From either love or sorrow. كاد القلب من جواه يذوب, the heart from the intensity of its sorrow would almost melt. يذوب, ذاب يذوب, يذوب. حين قال الوشاة. Who are the وشاة? وشاة is جمع واشن, right? Right? Which are the talebearers, right? Yeah, the gossipers, right? Usually with ill intent, right? When the people were saying, right, the heart was about كرب القلب من جواه أي من شدة حزنه, and جواه الجوى is شدة الوجد من عشق أو من حزن. كاد القلب من جواه يذوب. The heart from its intensity of sorrow was about to melt. حين قال الوشاة, when the gossipers spread word, هند غضوب, that Hind is really angry. غضوب is فعول, right? It's an intensive pattern, right? Right? غضوب يعني أي غاضبة, right? Right? And you can read so here كرب is من أفعال المقاربة, right? ترفع الاسم وتنصب الخبر. القلب is the ism of كرب, right? من جوى is جار مجرور, علامة جره هنا you can see يذوب is فعل مضارع, فاعله مستتر جوازا, تقديره هو, and the جملة of the فعل in the فاعل is في محل نصب خبر of كرب. Okay, so كرب is من أفعال المقاربة. The قلب is the ism of كرب. يذوب the فعل فاعل there is في محل نصب خبر of كرب. Right? So originally if you take كرب out, he says القلب من جواه يذوب. Right? That's a core sentence. القلب مبتدأ, يذوب is a جملة في محل رفع خبر. Right? It's a beautiful line of poetry, right? So that's the أفعال المقاربة. He kept it actually surprisingly brief because more can be said about them, right? The أفعال المقاربة. Right? Right? وما كادوا يفعلون. There's a couple of Quranic examples here, so please do the i'rab of them. Right? يعني وطفقا يخصفان عليهما, يعني شرعوا يعني يلزقون عليهما من ورق الجنة. This is from when they became aware of their unclothed state, so they covered themselves with the leaves of paradise. Right? So that's all there is to them. So these are that covers the first type of nawasikh, which are kana wa akhawatuha, and the two supplementary things to that are what? The things that resemble Laysa, which are 4. And then you have af'alul muqaraba. And the af'al muqaraba are of 3 types. 3 types insofar as they indicate either raja or qurb or al-akhdh fihi. You diagram it, do the i'rab of the examples, and some of the poetry is nicer than others. This is a beautiful line of poetry, right? كرب القلب من جواه يذوب. And it was said by a guy called لحبة اليربوعي. And a yarbu' is, what's a yarbu' is a? Yarbu' is like a gerbil. It's like a rat-like thing, but it's, okay? I don't know if they're related somehow. You can look al-yarbu'. Now why it's called al-yarbu'i, right? If you want to sort of nerd out, most of these examples you can find them in either Sharh Qatr al-Nada or Sharh Shudh al-Dhahab, and the editions, they often give you a little bit of background about the poem. Imam Badr Din al-Aini, the great Hanafi Imam, was a great Imam of the Arabic language. He actually did he has a book called Sharh al-Shawahid al-Kubra. It's like 1600 pages on the Shawahid. Pretty much any shahid that is used in the major books of grammar, you can find it there. But he also gives background on them. And especially gives quite a bit of insight on the pre-Islamic Arabs and the things they went through, etc. So these are the af'alul muqaraba. Then we get to inna wa akhawatuha. We'll stop there. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.